If anything can be said about the Kingdom Hearts franchise, it's that all of its fans seldom agree on anything. Some only play for the lore, others strictly for the gameplay, or even just for the Disney. I find myself in the middle of this, with my own reasons as to why I'm attracted to these games. Whatever the case may be, the fact of the matter is that I've played every single entry in the series. Because of this, I find it appropriate to fan the flames of this endless bickering about what is truly good or bad by ranking every game in the Kingdom Hearts franchise. First, I would like to mention the ranking criteria, specifically the fact that all of these games are being rated as games, rather than against each other. I'm doing it this way because, while the majority of the entries in the series share very similar styles of gameplay, trying to rate a deck builder and a rhythm game among more traditional action games is like comparing apples to oranges in any other context. Because of this method, I'm only spanning the tiers from S to D. Anything lower I feel would be an insult to these games' otherwise solid mechanics and presentation. There certainly isn't anything like a Sonic 06 or a Bubsy 3D here, thank God. Also, if it wasn't already, it should be obvious that this is just my opinion. The reasons why I may criticize a game might be the reasons you love it, and vice versa. At the end of the day, I still played every game on this list to completion. I don't at all feel indebted to these games, so for me to go along with that proves that there is something intrinsic about them that I fundamentally enjoy. Second, I will be rating each game by their most updated version, including any kind of final mix release, remake, or DLC as they apply. I will also be covering the games in order of release, with one exception for the sake of better discussion. This means that I will be covering in order Kingdom Hearts 1, Rechain of Memories, Kingdom Hearts 2, 358 Days Over 2, Recoded, Birth by Sleep, Dream Drop Distance, 0.2, Kingdom Hearts 3, and Melody of Memory. I'm not talking about any of the mobile games because I'm a fake fan. As for the footage of these games, I'll be sourcing them from various places on the internet. Any and all videos taken will have their sources linked in the description. It should also go without saying that there will be spoilers aplenty for every game in the franchise. So, if you're interested in actually playing these games, you probably want to click off now. Or don't, it doesn't really matter to me what you do. So, without wasting any more time, starting from the beginning and working our way to the present, these are all 10 currently released Kingdom Hearts games ranked. Let's get into it.
What? Who's there?
I've come.
Kingdom Hearts 1. What a simple and clean game no matter how you look at it. This is a game that had a lot to prove. For one, the entire gimmick of it was the collaboration between Squaresoft's Final Fantasy and all of Disney's animated canon. It also had to prove that not only was that a good idea, but it had to be interesting enough by itself to be able to have its own identity, which makes it phenomenal that it managed to succeed at both of those things with flying colors. I can't explain how amazing it is that so many elements of these two seemingly conflicting properties can coexist so well together. It's all just subtly a part of the world, and no character ever acts like it's not normal. Even down to the entire game's story. A young boy is propelled into the hero role, and has to go on an adventure to save his friends and defeat the man with ambitions of controlling the world, while learning about the importance of friendship along the way. It's so classically Disney while not feeling too alien to the players more familiar with Square's traditional works, due to concepts like the Heartless and the corruption and possession of people's hearts. Because of those themes, making someone like Maleficent, a villain from a movie with a ton of classical fairy tale imagery, into a major player in the story is genius. It almost makes you reconsider your original assumptions on if this concept could work or not due to how fitting it is. On that topic, I think one of the most fitting aspects of Disney integration was Sora's two companions, Donald and Goofy. Characters like Donald and Goofy function in a very similar way to someone like Mario. That is to say that, while you have baseline expectations as to how they will act, the actual role they play varies drastically depending on the context. The same way that Mario fits perfectly as a race car driver or a soccer player, Donald and Goofy make for a wonderful mage and knight respectively. It's an excellent way to handle those two characters. All of this praise isn't to discredit the Kingdom Hearts original content either. Sora, Riku, and Kairi are fleshed out incredibly well in the few scenes we get to see them together in. They're as believable as friends as they could possibly be, and it makes the ensuing drama between the three of them all the more tantalizing. I also just love the world selection of this game. Due to the time period the game was released in, Disney's most sensible properties for world inspiration were their aforementioned classic films and their more recent Renaissance-era movies. It just so happens that those two time periods remain as the two most iconic eras of the company, and as such, the worlds based on them feel evergreen in relevance. They are also rich in detail, and are designed very well with interesting layouts and fun platforming to boot. Speaking of gameplay, I feel like out of any Kingdom Hearts game, KH1 feels the most similar to a Final Fantasy. The entire command menu system is an elegant way of translating the actions taken in a more traditional RPG to a more lively, fully realized world. The game is really just basic attacks, with the occasional use of magic and summons whenever the time calls for them. It's very intuitive. Because of this heavier reliance on more traditional RPG mechanics, however, I often hear a lot of people remark on the gameplay as being very archaic. In the words of Best Guy Ever, Kingdom Hearts 1 has the grounded unga-bunga retard gameplay that it alone is known for. I can't really say that I disagree with this assertion, but I'd be lying if I didn't say it adds to the game's charm. Later games will further refine this command menu style, leaning it more towards the action side of the action RPG. While that is something a lot of people, myself included, prefer, Kingdom Hearts 1 still has an excellent, if not slightly underdeveloped combat system. Much better than some of the shit they started to come up with later, that's for sure. Overall, Kingdom Hearts 1 is a phenomenal experience from beginning to end. While some may have issues with how it handles its more simplistic gameplay, it's greatly made up for with its intuitive mechanics, engaging world design, the best atmosphere in the franchise, and an excellent story. If there is ever one Kingdom Hearts game to play, this is easily it. Everything in it flows so well and adds to a cohesive whole worthy of being experienced by everyone. KH1 easily makes a spot for itself in S tier. If you haven't played it, you should go fix that right now. Trust me, you'll like it a lot. Anyways, next game.
I play the magic card, Pot of Greed. It allows me to draw 2 cards from my deck.
Kingdom Hearts Re-Chain of Memories is a game I never would have played if it did not have Kingdom Hearts in the title. That isn't to say it's bad. In fact, I easily think it's the most underrated. It just so happens to have a lot going against it. I'm not going to pretend that I don't get why people dislike this game. If you were to say, hey, did you know that they're making a sequel to Kingdom Hearts? I feel like the last thing most people would want to hear would be, you get to run around a bunch of vacant lots playing war against your opponents. Since the game was originally on the GBA, I understand why the gameplay had to be changed. But deck builder card game action RPG hybrid is certainly not the first direction I would have went in. It's because of this radical departure from the norm that Chain of Memories easily has the steepest learning curve in the series. Once I was able to get into the rhythm of things, I found myself appreciating the combat. But towards the end of Sora's story, and especially during the Disney Worlds and Riku's route, I was definitely getting bored of its repetitive nature. Explore these watered-down, boxed-in rehashes of KH1 worlds, start a battle, demolish all the Heartless with slates, make a new room to progress the story, and repeat. The one-on-one fights are definitely the most interesting part of the game gameplay-wise, disregarding the disappointingly frequent, massive difficulty spikes they bring. The real saving grace of this experience is, to me, the story. The idea of Sora having his memories replaced over the course of the game to have a fixation on saving someone he's never even met is really interesting, especially since it comes to him in pieces, and the memories that are replaced are ones he has of Kairi. This cleverly gets around the potential criticism of whether or not it's even worth it to advance through Castle Oblivion if all of the characters know that their memories are being lost along the way. After all, how could Sora abandon this place now? The girl he loves is being held captive on the top floor. Not even last week he committed seppuku in her honor. What's a few lost memories gonna do now? It's honestly a bit chilling seeing Sora barge into the room Naminé is being held captive in with the same kind of vigor and ecstasy as he would for Kairi. He's then told that everything he's been brainwashed into thinking is true is actually a lie, and that the real girl he's in love with is someone he's been forced to forget about. Even with that, he still holds his head up high and delivers such a heartwarming message. That being, even if they are fake, the feelings I have right now are real, and I promise to protect you. It's just the sweetest little thing. It makes the fact that he's forced to forget Naminé to solve this entire mess all the more bittersweet. Riku's plot is also very interesting, now having him learn how to properly balance between light and dark and embrace the twilight in between, to be his own person separate from Ansem's influence. He also has a side plot with a puppet replica version of himself, where he has to teach him the meaning of being a real person and what happens during death. Jesus Christ, why is this game so dark? Speaking of dark, we get the establishment of a new antagonistic force, Organization 13, possibly the most iconic thing in Kingdom Hearts, at least for original content. Towards the end of KH1, we were hinted towards a threat much larger than Ansem, with the unknown fight added to Final Mix. The organization is the payoff to that setup. We have the introduction of Axel, a fan favorite, as he should be because he's great. I also really like Marluxia. I just think it's so cool that, at this point in the series, someone like him is important enough to be the final boss. And what a great final boss he is. For Sora, at least. Riku's fight with Ansem is very fitting, but also way too anticlimactic and easy for the last thing you do in the game. But yeah, that's really it for Chain of Memories. The thing about this game is that it's really hard to explain the appeal of it to someone. I like the story and I have an appreciation for the gameplay, but that isn't something you can truly experience if you haven't played it. However, I don't think I would even be confident in recommending someone play it. It's weird and gimmicky and repetitive. I think ideally it would be best for any new fan to play this game before KH2, but I completely understand and even encourage in a way to skip it. I did when I first played KH2 and I turned out fine. I think when it comes to my final thoughts on this game, it's definitely a game you should try playing if you intend to play KH2, but there's no harm in not finishing it. That being said, it is still very important to KH2 and should be known about beforehand. With all of that in mind, I think that Kingdom Hearts Re-Chain of Memories belongs in the B tier. A very ambitious game that has a very worthwhile story, but it's bogged down by its repetitive worlds and gimmicky combat. A solid sequel to the original, but not one I'd be willing to play on a whim the way I would KH1. With that, let's move on to the next game. I'm going to start this section off just as explosive as the game does and say that Kingdom Hearts 2 has the best opening cinematic in any game of all time. Okay, maybe not the best. Crash Bandicoot Warp's intro also gives me a similar feeling of unrestrained hype, but it definitely is the best out of any Kingdom Hearts game. It doesn't matter if it's been a year since I beat the game, or a day. Every time I watch it, I feel like I need to play the game again. It's absolute perfection. Do you know what else is perfection? This game's combat system. KH2's gameplay continues to be the best the series has ever seen, even 15 plus years and several installments later. The controls are buttery smooth, animations are quick to come out and frequently cancelable, and every option in combat is not only functional, but fun to use. Kingdom Hearts 2 also without a doubt has the best bosses in the franchise. There are too many good ones to count, but a special shout out goes to the Organization 13 data fights and Lingering Will, added in Final Mix. I've spent dozens of hours fighting all of these super bosses and I never get tired of doing it. I also feel inclined to give a similar seal of approval to the prologue. I know it's a point of contention between many fans on whether or not it's a good way to start the game, but I really love it. Part of it may be nostalgia. It is the part of the game I remember the most vividly from childhood, but I also just think it functions excellently as a way of setting the emotional tone of the game. Roxas is one of, if not the best character in the series, and being able to experience his tragedy by playing through it is the best possible way for it to actually resonate with the audience. Much better than if it was just explained in a cutscene or something. Really nice that this plot point was never ruined by some kind of revival later on that contradicts the entire point of his story. That would be embarrassing. The game is even able to bring itself full circle towards the end with him accepting his fate as a nobody and merging with Sora to make him a complete person. Excellent stuff. Speaking of nobodies, I really love how they are a natural extension of the Heartless. It stands to reason that, after the darkness takes control of someone's heart, something probably happens to their remaining body and soul. I can't really say I prefer them to the Heartless in KH1. One look at an Invisible or a Wyvern trounces the intimidation of any nobody type, but they still have very fun and definitely unsettling designs that are really cool to see. I like how Sora is a much more experienced fighter this time around. He's already had one adventure, he thinks, so he's much more adept at handling the Keyblade, which you could say is reflected in the game by how much more polished the combat is. In reality, it's much more likely that Square just wanted to make the gameplay the best it could be, and this is a happy coincidence, but it definitely adds to that immersion. Perhaps it was intentional that they made Roxas' controls noticeably more sluggish to make this difference in controls more apparent to the player. The reaction commands were definitely intentional. There's a reason why, despite there being so many games after this one, Sora has never felt more powerful than he does here, and it's entirely because of these QuickTime events. They do more than just prove his skill with the Keyblade. They show that he's evolved into a real warrior, capable of fighting with anything and everything if it will get the job done. I couldn't praise them enough. One thing I can't praise, however, is easily the biggest problem with Kingdom Hearts 2. Drive form ability acquisition. The fact that basic movement upgrades are restricted behind grinding is not very good design, especially when KH1 was so able to easily integrate some of them into the main story, like learning Glide after Neverland. It leads to the incredibly unfortunate situation of this game's abysmal world design. Very rarely are there ever rooms that are anything more than just empty hallways, as the game can't be expected to test you on skills you might not even have. An incredibly easy fix to this would be to just give the player the base form of the upgrade with each drive form, a la getting level 1 high jump with Valor form and level 1 glide with final form. The addition of the puzzle pieces and the Cavern of Remembrance in Final Mix did help remedy this issue a bit, but the issue still punctuates a majority of the game. And do you know what else punctuates way too much of the game? Filler. Yeah, this is the start of a terrible trend the Kingdom Hearts franchise has been struggling with even to this day, and that is Disney worlds being reduced to boring movie rehashes where essentially nothing happens to further the plot. This was especially apparent in Chain of Memories, but I feel less offended by it due to that game's lower key release and much smaller scope. Also, the aimlessness kinda aids the story a bit, at least in Sora's route. KH2, thankfully, gives an explanation as to why you're visiting these worlds, so it isn't totally pointless. And of course, there are still many well-integrated Disney worlds. It's just unfortunate that such a key part of the franchise's appeal has been reduced to a sideshow. The only other thing that really bothers me with this game is the beginning of the really weird retcons. I get why Sora, Riku, and Mickey have Keyblades, but why Kairi? And was it really necessary for Ansem to be the Heartless of Xehanort and not just of Ansem? At this point in the franchise, issues like these are incredibly trivial and certainly is nothing compared to the stuff to come. I'm usually willing to forgive a game for plot contrivances and suspensions of disbelief, and I definitely am able to do that here. It's just weird that it's even an issue. Yet, despite all of those issues, I still happily rate Kingdom Hearts 2 as an S-tier game. It's not by any means perfect, we all have our Atlantica phase, but the pros of the experience greatly outweigh any of the cons. I'm putting it below Kingdom Hearts 1 because I feel that as a game, KH1 is much more cohesive, but as the ending of a pseudo 3-game arc, I think KH2 excels greatly. In truth, you can't make me pick which one of these two games I think is better. I love them both equally. With that, let's move on. Kingdom Hearts 358 Days Over 2 was a game I had just as much difficulty writing for as the title of the game is to say. Why was this? Well, it's because this is the only entry in the series where I feel like I didn't have a lot I wanted to talk about. Everything is pretty mid. I do like it, but it's mid. There always seems to be a but attached to the end of everything with this game. As an example, I think Days tells a pretty interesting story. Despite its Tumblr self-insert fanfiction setup, it's executed pretty well. Xion is a great character, and her interactions with Roxas and Axel make for a lot of wholesome moments and a believable friendship. But in reality, Xion contributes very little to the story and is quite literally an afterthought, her tragic ending only existing to explain why she wasn't mentioned in KH2. The game is also filled with copious amounts of filler, with huge lapses in time where nothing consequential is happening. I really like how this game uses the command menu system. It's the only handheld game that does, and its controls and physics are surprisingly good. But, due to its very rigid mission structure and panel system, it's easy to feel boxed in, despite this gameplay style's emphasis on player expression. Also, despite it making the most of the hardware, the DS isn't really the best place for an action game. I often felt myself getting tired after long sessions because of the hand gymnastics necessary to play it. See why it's so complicated to talk about this game? I think a reason for this more lukewarm reception is a result of this being the point in the series where the Kingdom Hearts original content began to become the forefront of the story, over the original Disney Final Fantasy crossover. In fact, 0 Final Fantasy characters ever show up in this game, outside of the Moogle that runs the shop. Boy, I hope that won't become a trend. And the Disney half isn't looking so hot either. Because of that aforementioned mission structure, it's hard for them to ever tell a cohesive story. You're in Agrabah one minute and Wonderland the next. Speaking of, I feel like it's worth mentioning that, just like Chain of Memories, this game relies entirely on reused properties from earlier games. I played this game for the first time well out of order, but I can only guess that those following along with the games as they were released would be feeling a bit tired of these worlds. I understand it's easier to rely on previously established concepts, but that doesn't mean revisiting them every game is going to be fun. At least they were nice enough to make Neverland something other than just Hook's ship for the 3rd time. I hate to say that's it for discussion on Days, but honestly it is. It's definitely a game with a lot of problems, yet I still had enough fun with it to consider it pretty mid. As long as we can agree that Xion is precious and needs to be protected, then all is well. Because of this, I feel it right to place Kingdom Hearts 358 Days Over 2 on the B tier. I'm putting it below ReCom because I feel, despite its atypical gameplay, Chain of Memories was a much more cohesive experience, with a better and more consequential story to boot. I do prefer the gameplay of Days to ReCom, but to be honest that's not really a high bar, considering neither are perfect. And, in the end, Chain of Memories has a lot more going for it. Anyways, next game.
I think Glide knows a few hackers. Has Glide mentioned knowing hackers? Because I think she does.
Oh, Recoded. What a troublemaker this one was. Without question, this is the game that fluctuated the most on my tier list. It was the last Kingdom Hearts game I hadn't played after I made the decision to make this video, so I made sure to document everything I felt while playing. When I first started the game, I actually had a very high opinion of it. Instead of using the command menu, this game uses the command deck, basically having each of your attacks be on cooldown after use instead of tying them to a more traditional MP system. It usually gets a lot of hate from fans, but the way it was implemented here was excellent. Melding commands to make stronger ones was super fun, and being able to incorporate them into your combos rather than replacing them was really neat to see. And look at that, there's even some platforming, isn't that a sight for sore eyes? The game is definitely off to a great start. Then, I kept playing. And I kept playing. And I kept playing. So I guess I should start with what I thought was good. For one, and this is a big one, Recoded was built on the same engine as Days. I've already stated how the controls and physics in Days are excellent, so revisiting them was definitely a treat. I also really like the memory system, which prevents the game from letting you abuse commands that are too strong by limiting how much stuff is in your deck. And that's kind of it, honestly. I know I praised the platforming before, but in truth I ended up really disliking it towards the end of the game. You know how people complain about KH1's platforming, saying it's overly stiff and the camera makes traversal difficult? Yeah, well, Coded's platforming is exactly that. It's also just so samey. I get that it's a part of the story, but having everything be represented by these rigid blocks really makes level design boring. Speaking of levels, we are now officially in full reused Disney property Burnout. Here's a fun fact. Did you know that every Kingdom Hearts game so far has had Agrabah in it? And only once was it slightly interesting to explore. I am really not a fan of the continued reliance on these stale properties and worlds. Nothing against the properties themselves, but it's just not interesting to keep repeating the same content over and over. It also just completely sucks all of the replay value out of some of these entries. In the late game, I was practically begging for it to just end already, because it was very apparent to me that the game wasn't going to give me anything new. Actually, that's a lie. The game does frequently shake up the formula, and it does so in the worst way possible. intrusive gimmicks. Basically every single world in this game has some kind of annoying gimmick, have it be traversal related, combat related, or a mix of the two. It's very frustrating, especially because the actual game here is surprisingly good. I really like the traditional combat encounters, so it's just so disheartening to see the game so frequently pull me away from what I actually want to experience so I can play something I didn't sign up for. This is also the point in the franchise where the stories start to become bad. Something about a data version of Sora exploring Jiminy's journal, Riku has bugs, help Sora realize how many people are suffering, and oh by the way, Xehanort is back. It's easily the least important game in the franchise as far as the story is concerned, but at least it doesn't directly retcon anything in a bad way. That is to say, the plot is bad more so because it's boring rather than it ruining something. Still doesn't make it fun to experience though. Clearly you can tell that I do not have a high opinion on this game. This is definitely the franchise's lowest creative point. Recoded has solid gameplay mechanics that are ultimately bogged down by annoying gimmicks and creatively bankrupt levels. I am not at all interested in playing this game again, yet despite that I wouldn't necessarily say it's outright bad. The good that is here makes for an overall below average to mid-tier experience, only worthy of being played once, if at all. Wrapping up Recoded, it should come as no surprise that I am rating it as a C-tier game. It doesn't change my mind that this is a remake of a mobile game. It definitely should have reached for greater heights considering it was now on a proper handheld. Whatever, I'm sick of talking about it. Let's just move on. What is the next game anyway? Oh.
Baba baby, Baba baby! Da 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 da!
Several years ago, speedrunner Bloody Biscuits made a video detailing why he believes that Kingdom Hearts Birth by Sleep was the turning point of the franchise. Long story short, the effects of this game's style of storytelling and gameplay forever impacted the rest of the franchise, which especially stings for players like him and me that don't think Birth by Sleep is a very good game. Let me just say this now. It is honestly baffling how unrefined this game's combat system is. Despite coming out later, I decided to cover Recoded first because of how it handles its command deck. In Recoded, the animations for commands were quick and responsive, and augmented basic attacks instead of outright replacing them. In Birth by Sleep, not only are animations for commands sluggish, but the rest of the game's physics are horrendously unresponsive. Actions like the air slide, which were near instant in the DS titles, are now terribly laggy, with little means of acting out of them whatsoever. Fall speeds are ridiculously slow, which contributes to a much floatier feel to traversal. Keyblade combos are incredibly limp and lifeless. Because of this, bosses are often capable of punishing you for hitting them. All the animation cancelling? Gone. All the command integration? Gone. The balance of those commands? All of it is completely gone. Everything that could have gone wrong with Coda's command deck did, and is the major flaw inherent to the game's design. Now yes, I am fully aware of the fact that BBS did release first. However, I do not consider that a good excuse when, in all likelihood, it and Recoded were being developed at the same time, and the fact that BBS was released on superior hardware. That's far from the only issue of the game, unfortunately. The story is an absolute train wreck. Terra, Aqua, and Ven are not terribly interesting characters, and they are set up horribly as friends throughout the events of the game. Terra is your resident strong stupid one, Ven is an annoying kid, and Aqua is fine. The plot they find themselves in by Xehanort is utterly ridiculous. Oh, what's that? The Keyblade? Yeah, okay, sure. This game also hardcore retcons KH1 into oblivion. I did not need an explanation as to why Roxas looks different from Sora, nor did I need one on why Sora can use the Keyblade. Naminé said it herself in Kingdom Hearts 2. Some things really are better left unsaid. And that's the problem with this entire game. Prequels are inherently hard to write because doing so fills in gaps fans would prefer to speculate about. Yeah, sure, I spoke highly of Days despite it telling a largely unnecessary story, but I feel that the plot elements in that game do contribute to the greater whole, without explicitly rewriting or overly explaining past events. But it's not all bad. I do have some things I want to praise about this game. For one, I really like the final bosses of each route. Each of them are very fitting for the character that you play as, and were all really cool set pieces as well. On the topic of final bosses, I really like Vanitas. Maybe I'm over-exaggerating, but I do feel he's a saving grace of the story. Yeah, sure, he's evil, but less so in the I'm going to steal your body and cause mass genocide way, and more so just being a bit of a dickhead. What's that? Terra just thoughtlessly left the security of his homeland during a brief fit of anger? Better go chase after him, Ventus, I'm sure this one ended poorly. What's that? You're saying that Ven left behind this precious keepsake Terra gave him when they first met? Yeah, well guess what, Ventus sucks and I hate him. He's the kind of guy that would throw a red sock in with the whites and laugh at your new affinity for pink. He's the kind of guy that boxes his Pokemon for having bad IVs. Haley Joel Osment clearly had way too much fun voicing a bad guy for once, and he milks every moment of it. It's pretty great. Looking into gameplay, I actually like every single Disney World in this game. I might be inflating their quality, but I cannot understate just how refreshing it is to finally be able to explore new Disney Worlds, and the actual selection might be the most fitting in the series. Because this game is a prequel, it was fitting of them to base every world but Deep Space and Olympus off of Walt Disney-era Disney movies. Even so, Stitch is a pre-established character in the series due to his role as a summon in KH2. Along with that, because of the 10-year time gap between this game and KH1, they were able to adapt the part of Hercules where he was still a child in training. Also, I rarely hear anyone talk about this, so I feel like I need to mention it. Birth by Sleep is the first Kingdom Hearts game I played after having played a Final Fantasy game, that being FF7. Because I have this insight, I cannot express just how genius it is that, out of any character to be put in Olympus, it was Zack. Just yes to everything about this. This is easily my favorite incorporation of a Final Fantasy character into Kingdom Hearts, period. He's completely in character, and his interactions with Phil, Herc, and the heroes of each respective route fills me with so much joy. And that's another thing, the route structure. I like the fact that each character has their own story that influences the events of the other characters. Sure, it's not ideal to force you to play each of the worlds 3 times, but each of those routes have you experience something unique about those worlds, so overall I like it. But let's not forget, at the core of this experience is unrefined gameplay, poorly designed bosses, and a bad story. Birth by Sleep is definitely a game with a lot that's good about it, but with the flaws that are inherent to its very design, I don't feel it deserves a place anywhere above C tier. I'm putting it below Recoded because, even though I'd be more willing to play BBS again due to its more interesting worlds, as a game that came out on superior hardware too and was developed at the same time as Recoded, it's frankly embarrassing that it has all the problems it does. I'm sure I just got a lot of people upset by saying that, but whatever, this is my ranking. There are many like it, but this one is mine. Next game.
I've fallen asleep on my dream catcher again. Judging by the amount of dream goo, it was some powerful stuff.
You know, I gotta hand it to Xehanort. I too wish that I could create an organization of people that are different versions of myself. Ladies and gentlemen, it is time for me to say the coldest take in this entire video. Kingdom Hearts 3D Dream Drop Distance's story is absolutely terrible. For the first 18 or so hours of the game, nothing happens, and then, entirely within the last world, the game absolutely shits the bed with some of the worst writing the franchise has the displeasure of calling its own. I absolutely despise that Axel is back. Don't get me wrong, I think he's a great character, but he's so effective and memorable because of his earned sacrifice in KH2. But hey, who cares about tragedy, right? We don't want our fans to be sad now, do we? Let's pave the way for the return of Roxas and Naminé and Xion. Everyone will be so happy, isn't this just the best? Alright, I'm done. For real though, if Birth by Sleep was the beginning of the end, 3D is absolute rock bottom. I get the point in having a finale where all of your villains come back and are united under the mastermind, but it was done in the most clumsy way possible. But whatever, that's the story. And games are more than just the stories they tell. What about the gameplay? Do you really want me to answer that question? I'll give 3D one thing. Flow motion is a pretty alright gimmick. Sometimes it's just fun to be able to jump off walls. It does have one severe side effect, however. It completely invalidates any kind of interesting level design and platforming challenges. It's kind of pathetic to see parts of these worlds dedicated to these traversal challenges when you can just wall kick infinitely to reach any place you want anytime. It also breaks combat, which doesn't help. That ground slam you get from attacking after a wall jump is way too strong, and carried me throughout the abysmal early game mob fights. That, and the still horrendously unbalanced command deck. You all know the meme by now. Balloon and all of its variants remove any kind of interesting challenge you would experience in the game. There is never a situation where using Balloon is a bad idea, and if you stuff your deck with as many of them as you can carry, you've beaten the game before it's even had a chance to start. There's a common argument in games that goes as follows. Why bother complaining about something when you can just not use it? If you think about that for a second, you'll realize why this is so foolish. The responsibility for game design should be on the developer, not the player. When the latter is the case, those players will end up in one of two very undesirable situations. Either they optimize their play to the extent of removing any traces of fun, or they force themselves to play in a way they know is not optimal. So the story is the worst, and the gameplay is pretty crap. What then is the saving grace of the game? To be honest, I don't really know. What I can say is that the novelty of flow motion and the fact that the story doesn't happen until the end did make the majority of the game slightly entertaining for me. Even then it wasn't perfect. I also wasn't a fan of the drop mechanic for a while, but I ended up finding it to be not that big of a deal. I was able to better pace where and when I would be forced to switch characters as the game progressed. Plus, being able to play as Riku is always nice. The same can be said for that weird bargain bin Pokemon Refresh minigame. I didn't like that it was mandatory for ability acquisition, and to be honest I still don't, but I got used to it pretty quick, and the the whole ordeal isn't that much trouble. Also, get ready for this take. I'm actually not a huge fan of this game's soundtrack. That's not me saying that the music is terrible, it's just that overall I think it's pretty forgettable. I know I've yet to mention the soundtracks throughout this video, but that's because I felt it was redundant to continuously mention the consistently amazing OSTs for basically every game in the series. To give a brief review, since I think it is worth mentioning, KH1 has my favorite soundtrack, followed immediately by KH2, and everything else is in a conglomerate a ways below. 3D definitely has some great songs, but not enough of them for me to consider it anything above the weakest the series has to offer. That being said, the peak of the musical experience in the game was easily the amazing Fantasia World. It's become one of my favorite Disney Worlds in the series. I even made a save beforehand so I could play it again in isolation whenever I want. Ultimately, Dream Drop Distance is Birth by Sleep again with a worse story and more consistently boring Disney Worlds. It's an excuse to parkour over a bunch of clouds and flowers while the Nutcracker Suite is playing, and that's pretty much it. Because of this, Kingdom Hearts 3D Dream Drop Distance worms its way into D tier. Honestly, I don't know what else to say other than I'm sick of talking about it and I want to move on. Next.
You didn't have to cut me off.
This game makes the bottom of many lists on a technicality, that it's a demo. I also think this is the worst game in the series, but not just because it's a demo. Developers make games like these for multiple reasons. In this game's case, it was to show off the gameplay of Kingdom Hearts 3, and to tell a story. Let's talk about the gameplay first. For one, it definitely is a great thing that this game steered the franchise back towards its command menu roots. I know that many defend the command deck, some even prefer it, but I do not, and I'm happy that it's gone. That being said, the actual things you do with the command system isn't anything to write home about. A fetch quest, a boring maze, a couple of mob fights, and some bosses at the end. The other half of this demo is intent on telling a story, and I'm just going to be honest. I believe that this is the worst story the franchise has ever told. In reality, that honor probably goes to Dream Drop Distance, due to it being a much more detrimental story that has absolutely nothing that I like in it. However, I am more annoyed by 0.2's story because not only does it not have anything I like, but it actively infuriates me that it even exists. The game does that awful thing where it says that the events that are just being established now have actually always happened, and that the characters were just too dumb to notice. In this case, what was retconned was the ending of KH1. I really despise this, because KH1's ending is something I have a deep appreciation for. But what's the big deal, really? It's not actually that bad. Aqua fought some Heartless, and Mickey finds his Keyblade. Why get so uppity? Well, I'll tell you why. Sure, the actual events shown in Kingdom Hearts 1 aren't changed at all by this, and the original will always remain the same, but the context that came with it will not. What do people think of this scene now? Do they think, oh, I hope Riku and the King will be safe? After all, they're trapped in the realm of darkness. Or will they think, good thing Mickey stumbled in last minute while Aqua held down the fort, this potentially could have been an issue. See what I mean? Stories like these only serve to muddy the discourse of the original and forever change people's viewpoints on what was previously established. Now, yes, it is worth noting that all retcons do this. It's in the name, retroactive continuity. So why am I so upset about it now? Simple. I can easily excuse and even accept a retcon if I believe that it adds to the story. Goku is an alien? Now we have all of space to explore. Vader is Luke's father? It leads Anakin down his path of redemption. Aqua being off-screen to save Riku from some random Heartless? What does this add? Absolutely nothing. The game still ends with Aqua crossing paths with Diz in the Realm of Darkness, something we already knew happened at the end of Birth by Sleep. There is no point for the story to be told. It's so aggravating. I wasn't following Kingdom Hearts when this game released, and I can't truly speak for past me, but I can say that if this were to come out now, I'd be kind of worried for the game it's a demo of. Now, of course, the context is much different today. I played it for the first time very recently, and back when this game released, Kingdom Hearts 3 was still in active development. This demo showing off the gameplay probably put a lot of people at ease that maybe believed KH3 would feel bad to play. 0.2's fundamentals aren't at fault, it functions perfectly fine, so it was safe to believe that KH3 was in good hands. I originally thought that I was being too hard on 0.2. After all, it was just a demo for a much bigger and better game. But 0.2 isn't treated as a demo. It's treated as its own experience, with its own story and its own environments. So, as something to be taken in context by itself, it is embarrassing that this game belongs to this franchise. I understand why people like it. It's really short and it has a decent combat system. Apparently the super boss in it is really good. I wouldn't know because I never fought it. To me, Kingdom Hearts 0.2 Birth by Sleep, A Fragmentary Passage easily sits at the bottom of D tier. It annoys me that this joke of a game exists and I wish I could wipe it from my memory. Good riddance, 0.2. Let's just get to KH3 already.
1, 2, 3.
The wait for Kingdom Hearts 3 was different for everyone. For some it was only 2 years, for others it was 7, and for many it was 13. Wherever you find yourself in this, it's important to realize that none of those answers are wrong. For me, the time to be hyped for this game was long gone. If it released a decade sooner, then I would have been excited, but it didn't. As such, I had very little expectations going into the game. In fact, I played it for the first time 2 years after it came out. I'm not going to say that it knocked my socks off, but I did thoroughly enjoy it. It's an immensely flawed game, but I still enjoyed it. It really is so nice to have another full game that uses my preferred combat system. The developers did a very good job of capturing the appeal of the command menu from 1 and 2. I still prefer 2's more tight controls, but the physics in this game aren't bad at all. And even if I miss reaction commands, I will admit that there is stuff in KH3's combat that I prefer over 2, like being able to use both items and guard in midair. Both excellent additions. I also had a very fun time exploring some of these Disney worlds, even if I didn't care for some of their source material. The highlights obviously include the 2 Pixar worlds for Toy Story and Monsters Inc. I'm a huge Pixar fan, so it's great that the series is using its amazing properties for the first time. That being said, the actual stories of these worlds are pretty terrible. Most of these worlds feature full-on recreations of scenes from these movies, with Sora, Donald, and Goofy standing in the background contributing nothing to them. There is a philosophy of those both within and outside of the Kingdom Hearts fanbase that think all the Disney worlds have ever been are just lazy retellings of their original films. I often like to fight against this idea, especially for KH1, but I can't blame people for saying that when stuff like this exists. There is definitely a right way and a wrong way to do Disney in Kingdom Hearts. Stuff like Maleficent searching the worlds for their keyholes is really awesome. Something like the MCP using Ansem's computer to seize control of the Heartless Manufactory is super creative. Something like watching a pre-rendered movie recreating the entirety of the Let It Go sequence from Frozen is absolutely terrible. This is a video game. I'm supposed to be having fun. What even is the point of including this? Kingdom Hearts 3 represents the biggest divide between the Disney and Kingdom Hearts content the series has seen to date. To give the game credit, it does implement some of the plot elements into these Disney worlds very well, the obvious example being Best Boy Vanitas in Monstropolis. But 99% of the time, it's all completely shallow. Sure, a new organization member might show up every once in a while and mention some cryptic bullshit, but I don't see how that's at all different from something like Xigbar randomly being in Land of Dragons in 2, a game which is very heavily criticized for rarely combining its two halves together. The game also has truly horrendous pacing. Just like in 3D, nothing happens for the entirety of the game until the very end, where it's decided that things should start happening now and the plot proceeds to play out at lightning speed. KH2 doesn't have great pacing either, but at the very least there is a definitive beginning, middle, and end, not to mention the sprinkling in of Beast's Castle and Space Paranoids, which do contribute to the plot. I know I just spent so much time ranting about 0.2, but I honestly think it would have helped out the pacing of 3 if that demo was in the form of a prologue to this game. You could move Sora going to the Realm of Darkness to start the chain reaction of saving Aqua and Ven to the halfway point of the game, and reserve the end of the game for the rest of the characters to join in at the climax. It wouldn't be that great, and 0.2's story is still awful, but it would, at the very least, make rescuing Aqua and Ven feel much more rewarding, especially when the game itself set us up to feel more attached to that idea. This game's story also has the displeasure of being responsible for fully canonizing the return of all of our tragic characters. Bringing characters like Roxas, Naminé, and Xion back is essentially shitting all over the legacy of those characters and their games, for the sole purpose of making the audience feel good. And you know what's so bad about it? It worked! I don't like my emotions being played with like this, goddammit. I also really don't like all of the minor changes that suck some of the soul out of this game. Remember how in every other game the characters will walk forward on the menu screen? Why isn't that here? Same thing with the thematically relevant Keyblades. I loved getting Oathkeeper in KH1 and Bond of Flame and 2 Become 1 in KH2. It just feels a little empty when I'm not rewarded for achieving those story milestones. I may be in the minority, but I'm not a huge fan of this new art style. It definitely looks good, but I prefer the more cartoony style of the previous games. And with this game being the culmination of them, it makes it feel a little too disconnected. And here's the big one. Why aren't there any Final Fantasy characters in the base game? It seems as though the director thought of them as mere cameos that no one would miss, which is ridiculous. Sure, they used to be, but now, characters like Squall, Yuffie, Cid, Aerith, Cloud, and especially Sephiroth have become honorary Kingdom Hearts characters that I care about seeing. It seems like the addition of them in the DLC was a response to the backlash of excluding them in the base game. Such a weird predicament for the Disney Final Fantasy crossover. Speaking of DLC, this is the first Kingdom Hearts game to have additional content added via that method, with its Remind and Limit Cut episodes. I can't speak too much on this, as I've never gotten around to beating the super bosses, but I can say that it is excellent that they are in the game, and add a ton of replay value for those who enjoy it. The additional gameplay segments added in the Remind episode also got some good playtime out of me, so overall I'd say it's worth the investment. Overall, Kingdom Hearts 3 is a solid experience from beginning to end, with fun combat mechanics and expansive worlds bogged down by its poorly told story and bad pacing. There's definitely more good than bad here though, so I'm going to be putting Kingdom Hearts 3 at the top of B tier. The gameplay is already there, but if the pacing and story was polished up, it could have easily made its way into A tier. But I rate games on what they are, not by their potential. With that, let's move on to the final game. It's kind of interesting. When this game was announced, I thought it was the last possible thing the series would ever do, which then made it abundantly clear to me that it was the most obvious direction for the series to take. Many fans were very displeased at the announcement of another mandatory spin-off, one of a different genre no less. And you know what? I'm completely okay with it. Melody of Memory is a game I did not know I wanted until I played it, and now I can confidently say it stands as one of my favorite games in the series. I probably should have saved the soundtrack discussion for this game, but whatever. Needless to say, the Kingdom Hearts franchise has a countless number of truly top-tier songs, and the fact that this game lets me play Guitar Hero to some of my favorite music in all of gaming is truly something remarkable. The gameplay is exactly as you'd expect. Press the button in time with the enemy on screen to play along with the notes. It's as simple as that, and it's everything it needs to be. This game also has a ton of content. I beat the game totally content with everything I had done so far, and I didn't know of the extent of the synthesis system. Once I found out, I immediately booted the game back up and unlocked upwards of 15 more songs to sink my teeth into. It was glorious. As for any complaints regarding gameplay, it's really just minor stuff. Sometimes I'd get caught in the music and I feel the notes I need to press don't align with what I'd expect, but that's pretty infrequent. It's also unfortunate to see licensing concerns affect how complete the music selection felt, with all of the music related to Deep Jungle and Pirates of the Caribbean absent. I get Deep Jungle, it's been MIA since Chain of Memories, but not having anything for Pirates is odd for sure. Also, I'm guessing it's because this game shared development time with it, but Kingdom Hearts 3 was definitely shafted here. Every world has only one song playable for it, compared to every other world's minimum of 2 tracks. Unfortunate, as that game had a ton of music I'd love to play to. Moving into story, this game cleverly acts as a series recap for every game up to this point, with cutscenes of Kairi explaining the events that unfolded. It's also done in order of release, so for people that didn't play any of the side games, they get to see exactly when everything went down the drain. As for the story from this game specifically, it's really not much, and the game doesn't pretend like it is either. You go here, you go there, see you in Kingdom Hearts 4. It's truly a godsend how light the story is in this game. It makes it significantly more approachable for so many people, as a spin-off rhythm game should be. So yeah, that's Melody of Memory. This is the first Kingdom Hearts game since KH2 that I feel like I was able to enjoy guilt-free. Everything in between that time always had some kind of caveat. I felt like I needed to justify why exactly I might like them, flawed as they may be. But not this one. Kingdom Hearts Melody of Memory is a genuinely amazing game, one I happily suggest to any fan of Kingdom Hearts or of rhythm games. That being said, it's not on the same level of quality as KH1 and 2, so I'm putting it in the A tier. Good job, Melody of Memory.
Kairi!
Traitor.
Sephiroth! Yuffie!
Sora!
I'm a fool.
Xemnas!
You're right.
And with that, the end of the ranking is upon us. What you see here is my final tier list. I tried to be as objective as possible while keeping it entirely a subjective video, so even if you disagree with my placements, I hope you understand why I feel the way I do. Time for some real talk. I'm not going to be one of those people with some doomer take like the series should have ended with 1 or the story was never good, but it is apparent that I have been generally discontent with the state of the franchise after Kingdom Hearts 2. However, that isn't to say that I think it's beyond saving. I'm sure that they could easily make a game with combat just as fun as 2's, or worlds just as explorable as 1's, but I don't believe that the way things are going now will allow for the same level of soul. What I can hope for, and what I believe would be best moving forward, is a soft reboot of sorts. Don't pretend like the past games didn't happen, but don't solely rely on them like is tradition. Now is a better time than ever to take a look back at what worked, what didn't, and try not to repeat this destructive cycle all over again. So, as a means of closure, I'd like to answer one more question. Will I be playing the next Kingdom Hearts game, whatever it may be? Yes. At the end of the day, the only reason why I criticize is because I have a genuine love of these games, and I want them to be the best they can be. I may have been strict on KH3, but at least it got the gameplay down. So, with cautious optimism, I look to the future, and wait patiently for the announcement of whatever is next. I don't really know what else to say for a conclusion, so I guess I can end this video off with a few hopes I have for some future worlds. I'd love one based on The Incredibles, with a boss against an Omnidroid. I'd also love a return to Halloween Town in some form. You could have the monster of the game be the Axiom from WALL-E. I think it's only a matter of time before we get a world based on A New Hope. Like, come on, Star Wars is literally a franchise about the battle between light and dark. How could that not work? Let's see, now that Disney owns 20th Century Fox, there could be a Malcolm in the Middle world, Springfield, that's an option, a Timeless River-esque group of portals to different Family Guy cutaways. I'm just spitballing here. Wait, no. I have the perfect idea for a new world. De Fuhrer's face.